Hi all students, in this particular video we'll be discussing which is the right exam for you to take if you're looking for MBA admissions. Should it be GMAT Focus Edition, should it be GRE or should it be CAT? So depending on the location or where you are trying to study, all three or a subset of these three might be the ones that you're looking at. So we'll basically discuss the exams from the perspective of what is the format of the exam, what is the content of the exam, if you're preparing for admission into specific schools, which exam should you take. So this is mostly from the perspective of Indian students applying for MBA programs as such in India as well as abroad. So let's get started. Let's try to find out which is the right exam for you to apply. Okay, so let us start with first taking an overview look of the exam itself. What is there in the exam? What is going to be asked? What is the test format? All of that, we'll start with that. So let us consider the test format of the GRE versus the GMAT versus the CAT. So as most of you know, if you are preparing for MBA entrance exam, in Indian schools, you would be taking the CAT exam. If you're applying for US based schools or UK or European schools, you will have to take the GMAT exam as such. Firstly, the location is the big differentiator. But again, before you decide on where you should actually go and which programs you should apply, you should consider whether the exam would give you or would play to your particular strengths. Some exams are good for certain students, some exams are not good for certain students. So let us take a look at the exams themselves to identify whether this exam is the right exam for you, whether this exam would actually show you in the true light of your abilities as such. So let us first take a look at the GRE exam. Now the GRE exam is an exam which has a lot of analytical writing. It has a lot of argumentation. It requires somebody who has the ability to write convincingly, write articulately. So anybody who is from the social sciences or who has a degree in humanities or any of these sciences where they are able to think critically and write effectively, this is an exam that would actually play to your strengths. Similarly, there is strong verbal reasoning section. A verbal reasoning section in GRE is more inclined towards vocabulary. So if you have had a good education in terms of going to schools with a very good English medium education, as well as basically if you have had a good education in India, there are schools where the medium of instruction is sometimes not English, and those students struggle with vocabulary based questions, grammar based questions. But if you have had a good schooling and you have a good vocabulary, if you have read widely and you actually have a good hold on English in terms of the words and the English usage as such, then actually you will have a comparative advantage in GRE, because here you will be playing to your strengths. Your writing would also be good, your vocabulary would also be good, so you do comparatively better in the verbal reasoning part. The quantitative reasoning over here is actually much lesser as compared to all three exams. In verbal reasoning also, there are questions which are like fill in the blanks questions, which tend to be simpler than like reading comprehension questions or critical reasoning questions. So if you consider the three exams as such, this section and this section for the GRE, comparatively, all three of them have a verbal reasoning section, all three have a quantitative reasoning section, but for the GRE, these are actually much simpler. But they test slightly different things. So even in quantitative reasoning, the formats of the questions are slightly different, they test differently, and because of that, certain students have advantage in that particular section. I'll go deep dive into each section later, but the basic idea that you have to remember is that here a lot of emphasis is given on writing, a lot of emphasis is given on articulation of ideas, and on vocabulary, and students from humanities, social sciences, and those who have had a good schooling have a natural advantage in the GRE as compared to the other two exams as such. Now let's consider the GMAT versus the CAT. Now who is at an advantage in GMAT, who is at an advantage in CAT? Who should be looking for GMAT, who should be looking for CAT as such? See, if you're looking for MBA in foreign colleges, but you have a lot of experience in preparing for CAT, if you have given CAT before, you have prepared for CAT before, more than GRE, GMAT would be the right exam for you. Primarily because there is a more significant overlap between GMAT and CAT than between GRE and CAT, which means that much of your preparation is already done. With that in mind, especially when you have GMAT, not just the original GMAT, but now you have the GMAT Focus Edition. The Focus Edition, I feel, is much more oriented towards CAT than it has ever been before. So what are the changes? Why is it actually more oriented towards CAT? I'll explain to you. So they have now removed the analytical writing section. Once the analytical writing section is removed, the emphasis on writing or articulation of ideas, on convincing arguments, all of that is removed. It is now far more clear-cut as quantitative reasoning, logical reasoning, and data insights. Now, once the analytical writing part is removed, the remaining three sections are far more clear-cut, and the skills that they test are also far more clear-cut. You have the quantitative reasoning, which is simpler than CAT but harder than GRE. So I would say the difficulty level is this is easier, this is harder, somewhere in the middle, and this is the hardest as such. So it is easier than CAT, but it is harder than GRE as such. Similarly, over here also verbal reasoning is harder than GRE, but in some ways it is easier than CAT. In some ways it is harder than CAT. So both of them are there. I would say they are roughly equal, but in terms of reading comprehension, I feel CAT reading comprehension is harder, but it has critical reasoning which is not there in CAT. So a different skill is tested, which in turn is also fairly hard. So I would say that GMAT Focus Edition in terms of verbal reasoning is slightly easier in terms of reading comprehension and slightly harder in terms of a different skill tested, which is critical reasoning. So I'd say neither is easier, neither CAT is easier nor is GMAT harder as such. They are slightly different, and because they test different skills, sometimes some students can do well in a particular format and sometimes other students can do better in, like, say, GMAT verbal reasoning as compared to CAT, or vice versa. But the idea over here is, if you see between GMAT and CAT, there is significant overlap. Between quantitative reasoning of GMAT and quantitative reasoning of CAT, there is significant overlap. It's just that most of the quantitative reasoning questions of GMAT actually are easier questions of CAT. In CAT, you have much higher, much more advanced quantitative reasoning. Here it is much simpler. You have simpler questions from arithmetic, algebra, and number systems, number theory as such. You do not have anything from geometry. So a big portion, a big source of worry, a big source of a headache in quant is actually removed in the Focus Edition. There is no geometry. There are data sufficiency questions that can be troublesome. But in general, this is a much easier form of quant as compared to what actually comes in CAT. CAT is a tremendously difficult quant, especially if you see the recent year CATs. It can be very, very difficult. But the GMAT Focus Edition is not like that. It is fairly stable in its difficulty, and because it is fairly stable in its difficulty, it is more predictable also. Now over here, what exactly should you actually prepare for? You have arithmetic. Arithmetic also has some number theory questions, basically that, okay, there are integers, there are properties of numbers, etc. So arithmetic also includes that. There are basic questions of arithmetic and algebra. They can either be in the form of problem solving, so like word problems like of time, speed, distance, or they can be in the form of data sufficiency. So these are far clear-cut, easily manageable portion and very, very clear-cut type of questions as such. You can practice for them and you can very clearly solve most of the questions as such. But when the portion is like constricted and well defined, what happens? The competition becomes very difficult to solve. So a lot of students are able to solve all the questions correctly. All of the 21 questions that come, many people are able to solve them with 100% accuracy. Now, if people are able to solve with 100% accuracy, what happens? That, see, over here your score is between 60 to 90. If you score at 100% accuracy, you get all 21 questions correct, you get a score of 90. You get one question wrong, it suddenly slips down to 85 and all. If you get two questions wrong, it goes below 80. So over here, every question is very, very important because the questions are doable. So here accuracy is extremely important. You cannot afford to make even a single error in the quantitative reasoning section. One error is fine, two errors, you are already in a slightly dicey area as such. More than two errors, you will be in serious difficulty in getting a high score as such. Consider the verbal reasoning section. The verbal reasoning section is also very clearly defined. There is reading comprehension and critical reasoning. Even if you get two questions incorrect in this section, you will still be at the 99 percentile level. 2-3 questions, you can still get some questions incorrect because the race in the verbal reasoning section is not that intense. So with that in mind, so over here, what is the level of difficulty of reading comprehension? How is the reading comprehension? So if I compare to GRE reading comprehension, the GRE reading comprehension generally is fairly simple, shorter and much more direct as such. Here, the reading comprehension is not that direct. It requires you to think more. The questions are more inferential and the paragraph is around 400 words as such. So it is not trivial. it requires you to think, and it requires you to reason out. And there is a good chance that even with a lot of reasoning, you can make mistakes in questions on reading comprehension because there is some amount of subjectivity involved. Critical reasoning again is a very important topic over here. Critical reasoning, I feel, is not a subjective area as such. I think it is more or less something that somebody can actually get very good at, where they can perfect it, and with practice they can get to like 100% accuracy or near 100% accuracy also, because it is fairly formulaic in the way the questions are asked and in the way the options are phrased. So if you solve enough number of questions in critical reasoning, you get to see the formula fairly often, where okay, if a setup like this is given, if this kind of information is given, okay, this is the flaw in this reasoning is basically a comparison between percentages and numbers. And once you start spotting those errors easily after a lot of practice, this doesn't remain that subjective anymore. So critical reasoning, I feel, is a skill that you have to develop with patience and practice. But if you develop it, you can score very, very well in the verbal reasoning section. Now let's come to the data insights questions. This is a new section that has been added to GMAT Focus Edition. Earlier you had the analytical writing plus we had a different section of analytical writing plus integrated reasoning. The AWA and IR section have been removed as such. What was part of the old integrated reasoning has kind of been expanded and put into a separate section, which is the data insights. Earlier, the AWA and integrated reasoning were not part of your GMAT score, but data insights is now part of your GMAT score. Now, how does this affect you? So, if you are somebody who is very quantitatively inclined, this is actually a strength for you. Why is this a strength? Now, out of the 3 sections, 2 sections, that is the quantitative reasoning section and the data insight section, is quant based. Now, if it is quant based, you are at an advantage as compared to when if only earlier your score was only quant reasoning and verbal reasoning, so each had 50% weightage. So, if you were stronger in quant and weaker in verbal reasoning, you would actually be at a disadvantage. But now, since it is 2 out of 3 sections are quant based, you are actually at a fairly significant advantage in this particular focus edition than earlier. So if you are somebody who is looking for MBA programs outside India, I would say that if your strength is quant, okay, or if you are prepared for Indian MBA exams, which tend to be very quant driven and you have already gone through the fire with them, it makes sense for you to actually consider the GMAT Focus Edition. If you have not prepared for any exam as such yet, and you are somebody who is extremely gifted in the verbal area, you have actually written often, you are somebody who writes often for your school magazines or like for your college magazines. If you are extremely verbally gifted, the GRE might be a better suit for you. But a big caveat over here, I'll actually come in the next slide. There are limitations to where the GRE is actually considered. It is considered for fewer schools than the GMAT. But with that, even then, I would say that if you are extremely verbally gifted, GRE is a better fit for you. If you're somebody who has prepared for Indian MBA exams before, if you've gone through the fire with the quantitative exams, or if you're just quantitatively inclined, the GMAT Focus Edition is definitely a better fit for you. Okay. Now let us consider to the CAT exam. Now a lot of students who are studying and working in India would have taken the CAT exam. It's a annual, I would say a rite of passage for many students who have to prepare for the CAT exam. Some people prepare for 2 years, 3 years, etc. It's a very difficult exam. The difference between, see, if all of the exams, if you consider, this is by far the most difficult in all 3 sections. The verbal ability section, the VARC section as they call, is definitely the hardest. The RCs are definitely much more harder to crack than the GRE as well as the GMAT Focus Edition. A lot of students are actually afraid of the GMAT's verbal. They feel that, okay, GMAT verbal reasoning is harder than CAT VARC, but I do not feel that is the case, because I feel CAT's reading comprehension is truly trickier than the reading comprehension of GMAT as such. The passages are harder to understand. They come from sociology, art, history, from music, from a wide variety of sources, and because they come from a wide variety of sources, understanding them, grasping them is harder. The questions are far more inferential, they are far more, you need to think far more deeper while answering a CAT reading comprehension question as compared to a GMAT verbal reasoning question as such. So I feel RC is definitely harder. Even the VA part, where there are 8 questions of VA, 16 questions of RC, I feel even the VA part is harder. and it is more luck based, where you sometimes can get lucky, sometimes you can be unlucky as such. But overall, I feel CAT is far more harder. Each question is harder. But what happens when the difficulty increases? The scope for how many errors are allowed actually also improves. So you can make questions where you can get like 4, 5, 6 questions wrong in CAT also, and still do well in the overall score and still have like 99 percentile plus in CAT. But if you do 6 questions wrong in GMAT verbal reasoning, you're not getting a good score. So because what happens with GMAT, because the portion is lesser, because the questions are easier, the scope for error is lesser, the margin for error is lesser. You can't get that many questions wrong in GMAT because your score or your final percentile will be severely punished. So that is basically what you have to keep in mind. Now over here, there is a third, instead of data insights in CAT, you have the logical reasoning and data interpretation section. See, data insights in GMAT focus edition is fairly quantitatively driven. It is not entirely quantitative. There are some text-based questions, some verbal reasoning questions also, where you have to read a caselet or read a paragraph and understand information which is not given in quantitative terms and convert it into quantitative information at times, or even see information which is essentially critical reasoning information that is given in those data insights questions. But it is, as I would say, that the proportion of quant to non-quant is almost 80 to 20%. So 4 times as much quant questions come as non-quant questions. So over here also, I feel it is fairly quantitatively driven. The LRDI section is not quantitatively driven at all. In fact, while they say it is logical reasoning and data interpretation has over the years almost completely vanished from this particular section. It has become almost entirely logical reasoning. Data interpretation comes in fits and bursts, where it is part of the set but not the main part of the set as such, where you have to do some amount of quantitative number crunching, but the main skills tested are still logical reasoning, where you have to enumerate all the cases, where you have to consider all the possible arrangements, where you have to consider the scheduling of appointments, where you have to consider the arrangement around a table, you have to consider routes or networks. So a huge part of it is just logical reasoning. And this is extremely difficult, not just for the novice test taker. We have taken CAT several years, and even we actually fear the LRDI section because it is unpredictable. You can't 100% prepare for it because they always put something which is completely new, completely not seen before. And almost all of the sets are fairly difficult to solve under pressure. Many students are able to solve it outside. After the CAT is over, you come outside, you feel that, oh, this set was actually trivial. But in the exam hall, under pressure, thinking logically is very difficult to do. So this section is actually one of the hardest sections of CAT, and this is something that is not there at all in either GMAT or the GRE. So who should take the CAT, who should take the GMAT, who should take the GRE? I would say that if you're an Indian student or working in India, take the CAT. It is a difficult exam. It is something that it will actually punish you. But with punishment comes learnings, and with that will come skills. You will become very, 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 very good at quant. And if you become very, very good at quant, you will find GMAT quant and GRE quant to be trivially easy. So you should definitely give CAT. But I know that CAT is not fair for a lot of students, especially students who struggle in quant or who struggle in LRDI. They find this to be a traumatic experience. So I know that this is not an exam which everybody will excel in. So if you are not excelling in CAT, what should you do? You can either keep on practicing and hope that over time you will actually overcome those weaknesses, or you can look at other exams like GMAT, because in GMAT there are other questions asked which actually might be your strengths. So for example, if somebody is good at reading comprehension but struggles in LRDI, for them GMAT might be the right exam because you do not have the logical reasoning part. You have only data insights which are far more easier to solve than what actually comes in CAT. So a lot of students who are quantitatively inclined but find verbal like RCs of CAT unmanageable, or find that LRDI is a nightmare, GMAT I feel is the perfect fit for you. It is neither too hard nor too trivially easy, such that there is no differentiation between the between ordinary test takers and extraordinary test takers. Over here in the GRE exam, if you are extremely good at argumentation, if you are extremely good at writing, that is the right exam for you. But if you are not especially good at writing, if you are not somebody who writes regularly, then I would say that GMAT FE or GMAT Focus Edition is the right exam for you. So now let us take a look at the second part, which is the scoring system. What are the scores? What should you actually aim at? what kind of scores are, where can you actually use them. Let's take a look at all of that. So consider the GRE, GMAT and CAT. So the overall score of GRE varies between 260 to 340. Each individually is up to like somewhere between 130 to 170 as such. Now, even though it is 130 to 170, for you to actually get a good score, you need to get a good score in both QR and VR. And those good scores are at least starting from 160 onwards, but ideally you should get at least 165 as such. A lot of students get like full marks in GRE. So because they are getting full marks in GRE, what is essentially happening over here? There is very little room for error. So you should be somebody who has high attention to detail. These are easy questions, but you should not make silly mistakes. That is the whole point over here. So here QR and VR score go from 130 to 170. There are 1 point increments, so you can get like 167, 168, etc. And there is AWA, it's scored between 0 to 6 as such, and there are 0.5 half mark increments, so you can get 5, 5.5, 4.5, etc. Now, these systems in GRE are adaptive systems. What does it mean that it is an adaptive system? Basically, the next question that you get depends on whether or not you have answered this question correctly. So basically, they start from a point, which means that, okay, this is like the baseline from which the testing will start. If you get the question correct, you move to a slightly harder question level. If you get the question wrong, you get to move to a slightly easier question level. Now, suppose you get this harder question right, you move to a slightly more harder question. You get the question wrong, you come back to the original level, which is like the moderate level. If you get this question wrong also, you get to the easier level as such. So basically, you are like at a random path. If you get the question correct, you go up. You get the question wrong, you come down in difficulty. You get the question up, you go up, up, and you keep going up, up, up in terms of difficulty, the more the number of questions you solve correctly. So the test that you take will be very different than the test that somebody else will take, because it depends on the path you have taken as such. Okay, so this is why it's an adaptive section. It progressively gets harder the more questions that you solve. Now, with this in mind, just remember, even in the test in GRE and GMAT, both of these are adaptive tests also. A lot of students start to think that, okay, I got an easier question. Does this mean that I got the last question wrong? It does not mean that you got the last question wrong. Sometimes easier questions are put in because you have now suddenly entered a different topic that has not been tested before. So for example, if you went and solved a lot of arithmetic questions, suddenly a question comes from algebra, it will again start back from the easy level as such. So just because an easier question has come on your screen, it does not mean at all that you have made an incorrect choice. Okay, so this is something that you have to remember. Both of these are adaptive, which means that you get harder questions as you solve correctly, you get easier questions as you solve incorrectly. Now over here, in the important thing to remember about the GRE and GMAT is that the score is valid for 5 years. So you can give the GMAT. If you want to continue working for another year, your GMAT score is still valid, which means that you can use that GMAT score after you have actually worked for a substantial amount of time, gain the work experience, and then you can still use that GMAT score to apply to MBA colleges. So this is the additional advantage of both the GRE score and the GMAT score. This is not true for CAT. If you give the CAT in 1 year, that score becomes invalid. So you have to give it again in the next year. If you every year where you are actually looking to apply, you have to give the CAT on that particular year. So this is another advantage of the GRE and GMAT versus the CAT. Okay, if you take a look at the GMAT section, the scoring is between 205 to 805, 805 being the 100 percentile, 785 to 805 is the 100 percentile, 765 to 775 I think is the 99 percentile and all. So over here basically these are the final score that is given on this scale, and this scale will essentially help you get your final ranking. So when the admissions office takes a look at your score, it will take a look at the percentile score of your GMAT score. So they will take a look at, okay, is it 705, is it 725? They will take a look at that score, and they will have they will filter based on that score. They will also take a look at your individual quant score, at your individual verbal reasoning score, and the data insight score. So they will also have filters based on those scores also. Similarly over here, this is 130 to 170 in per section and 260 to 340 overall as such. So only QR and VR essentially are being used for the final score. Your analytical writing is not really part of the final score as such. Okay. Now, in the score sending, for GRE, you have to actually select before you give the exam. So, if you select 4 exams before you take the exam where that particular report can be sent. So, you can actually select which programs before you take the test, and you can essentially decide at the end of the test when you see that whether you want to actually send the report or not. So, you can definitely not send your GRE score, but essentially you have to pick the colleges beforehand before you start the test. Now, in GMAT Focus Edition, they have made the change where you can select the 5 colleges that receive your score after you're done with the exam. So depending on the score of the exam, you can decide that, okay, I can apply to these colleges, and you can make that decision afterwards. Now, why is this important? Because unless you have taken the exam, you don't exactly know where you're going to end up going. You do not know if you do particularly well in the exam, you might actually want to apply to colleges which you earlier thought were out of your reach. So this is an advantage, relative advantage of GMAT versus the GRE, where you can see the score and then decide where you want to apply. Okay. And you have like almost 48 hours after receiving the report, where you can send it to 5 schools for free after receiving the report as such. So basically in CAT, you do not send it to anybody. The IIMs know your score by default, and then they call you based on not whether your score is high enough to meet their eligibility criteria. There is no separate application process where you have to apply. There is application process for other like MBA programs as such. But once you have actually given the exam, in itself, most of the, once they receive your CAT score, by default, you can select which programs you are applying to. When you're filling the CAT form itself, you can select all programs, and based on that, they will give you a score. There is no charge or separate charge for applying for a program as such. Okay. In the CAT, the scores, as you can see, are minus 49 to 198. Nobody gets 198. It's also very rare to get minus 49. There is negative marking over here. There is so over here, basically the scores that are considered like say 99 percentile plus would be around 76 to 80 or so would be considered 99 percentile plus. Again, it varies widely because depending on a year, if a particular year one of the slots is easier, one of the slots is harder. There are 3 slots. Sometimes one slot can be scaled up by 7 marks. It can be scaled down by 6 marks. So it is an entirely different exam as compared to GMAT and GRE, which are very standardized such that the test taking experience does not really vary that much. But in CAT, the test taking experience can be very, very different. Sometimes like your score of 110 might not be enough to clear the cutoffs for the top MBA colleges. Sometimes 90 might be enough. So again, it is like completely different. It depends on that day. On that day in your slot, what is the level of the exam, how difficult it is. It is a standardized exam given to everybody. So there's linear testing. So there is no adaptive testing as such. There is no standardization of the test, which means that the standardization of the test is done post the test, and then your scores are compared to everybody in your slot versus the people in other slot, and then your test scores are actually normalized. They are not standardized. They are normalized so that each slot like medians line up, each slot's top end line up, etc. So this normalization is done post the exam, but essentially the scores that are required can vary quite a bit. So there is a lot of anxiety about it. How much should I attempt? What is a good score? Nobody really can tell that about CAT, but you have a better idea about GRE and GMAT as such. Now, when it comes to score acceptance, so basically whenever you wanted to apply for Indian MBA colleges, you had to take the CAT. It is accepted by 20 IIMs and many non-IIM, 91 non-IIM institutions, but essentially it's a basic exam to take for Indian MBAs. Now, if you want to actually go for foreign MBA, you have to take the GMAT exam. So a lot of students think that, okay, GMAT is only if I want to go abroad. If I want to study in India, I do not need to take the GMAT exam. But that is not true. Many programs in India use the GMAT score. So even if you plan to actually study in India, still I would suggest that the GMAT Focus Edition might actually help you achieve those dreams than the CAT. There are students who take CAT year after year after year without realizing that they could have actually gone into their dream B school using the GMAT, which might be more to their strength as such. So there are many programs like ISB. There are many other programs also within Indian MBA system where the GMAT score is accepted. So we have put up a detailed video explaining which are the Indian MBA schools which accept the GMAT score. So do take a look at that, because it is definitely something that will definitely help you. See, if you are struggling with the CAT exam, take a look at the GMAT exam, because it might actually be the key to you achieving your true potential. CAT might not help you actually achieve your true potential because you're not playing to your strengths in that. So in this particular way, GMAT might actually help you get into the dream MBA college in India also. But outside India, it is accepted by 2,400 business schools in over 7,700 programs. It is the standard that is used for all MBA admissions. Now, what has happened is that in recent years, many of the business schools have tried to widen their applicant pool, and in an effort to widen the applicant pool, they have also started accepting the GRE scores, where they take the GRE scores, they use a conversion calculator, convert the GRE score to an equivalent GMAT score, and then based on that equivalent GMAT score, consider whether or not you are shortlisted for the program or not. So basically, GRE is it's accepted by 1,1300 business schools, and it is basically it is converted. You will have a calculator or a converter tool which would convert your GRE score into an equivalent GMAT score. So you can get an idea that should I take the GRE or should I take the GMAT, and if you have already taken the GRE and it's still valid, whether what is the converted score in GMAT, whether it would help you get the colleges that you are actually applying to. So you consider that what is the equivalence, and if your GRE score is still valid, you might not need to take the GMAT at all. Now, one more additional thing that they have done for the GMAT Focus Edition, which I feel is a huge improvement over what it used to be earlier, and something that is still missing in the GRE, is that you get a comprehensive scorecard in the GMAT. You get a scorecard as to what is your percentile, not just in the section, not just saying that, okay, quantitative reasoning, you are like 98 percentile or 97 percentile, but in each part, that in arithmetic you scored at this percentile, in algebra you scored at this much percentile. You also get, like, you have those 21 questions, how much time did you take for each question? Did you get it correct? Did you get it wrong? What was the type of question? Was it based on time, speed, distance? Was it a word problem? You get a proper split of all the questions answered, how many you got correct, how many you got incorrect, and you can basically use that insights to prepare if you are reapplying for the exam or you're going to retake the exam. You will know exactly what your weak areas are. You can work on them and retake the exam. The difficulty over here with GMAT is that they don't actually give you the actual question paper. So you can't look at the question paper and say that, okay, here, this is the question I got wrong. Okay, how did I get it wrong? Can I try to resolve it? Can I see why I got it wrong? You do not get to do that because they don't share the question paper with you. So that is the downside. While you get an idea about where your weaknesses are, you can never see the actual question that you solve. You can never again take or reattempt that question or learn from the mistake you made, because here only you get like the insights of it without the actual basic data as such. In GRE, the insights are also not free. So there is a basic scorecard given without any detail as to where you made a mistake, how many mistakes you made, what was your percentile in different sections. Nothing of that sort is given. In CAT, a basic scorecard is given, but they give you the actual question paper and they tell you the answer key and the actual question paper. So you can actually find out that I made a mistake in time, speed and distance. I made a mistake in this. With that level of insight into the paper, it is much easier to see where you're going wrong, because you can see it at a question level. Here you can only see it at a topic level or a question type level, but not at a question level as such. So even though CAT gives a basic scorecard, it is far more transparent than the GMAT exam. Both GMAT and GRE, I feel, are far less transparent in how they actually test or how they show the test results. But that is basically a drawback of the fact that they are using an adaptive section. They do not want their questions getting out because they keep reusing those questions. So they do not want their questions to be in the public domain. The advantage of that is then you have a score which is valid for 5 years, you have an adaptive test, etc., etc. But the disadvantage is that there is no question level transparency in GRE or GMAT as such. Now, what is the 99 percentile score? So as I mentioned, for VR and QR, it's written like you have to get near perfect scores. It's not that necessary to get near perfect scores of 169 and 170. There are students who can get in by 160, 166 and 163 also. But essentially, you need somewhere around mid 160s at least. So you can't go below 160, you can't go below 162 also. You need near high 160s as such. Especially in QR, the number of people getting almost complete 170 are so many that you need to be almost entirely perfect in QR. There is no scope for error. There is no margin for error over here. In GMAT also, you need an overall of around 705. So you see the scores are VR 87, QR 90, DI 85 as such. So QR 90 basically implies that you have to be near perfect, because one question wrong, you slip directly to 85. Another question wrong, you go slip back to 80. So because of that, because of the like extreme penalty for getting even a single question wrong is very high in QR. That's why people have put 90, because it is extremely penalized, because the race in QR is intense. It is not as intense in VR, it is not as intense in data insights. Yet, I feel data insights is a new section, so that's why it's not so intense. As more people take the test, as it becomes more known, as more people practice questions from data insights, even that will be hotly contested. So even the race there will be intense after a lot of students have practice of that. In CAT, your overall score can be 76, 80 will be enough in particular years. 90 might not be in particular years. So this figure has absolutely no meaning as such. We have just given the numbers of what were true for last year. Now let's come to the consideration. So what important consideration that you should have, which exam you should take? One of the most important considerations for a lot of students is the cost of the exam. So as you might know, that GMAT is fairly expensive. It is, the application for the exam itself is 28,000 rupees, and that's not an exam that you can take multiple times without a significant hit to your pocket. So again, the GRE is slightly cheaper, but it is only slightly cheaper. For this particular difference in cost, I would say that it does not make sense to go for the GRE, especially if you are an Indian student who is quantitatively inclined, or even if you are not particularly quantitatively inclined, but you are not somebody who writes regularly. I still feel that GMAT is a far better fit for most Indian students, unless those who are the editors of their college newspaper. Other than those kind of students, I would say the GMAT is a much better fit for most Indian students as such. So the difference in the cost, while it is there, it is not really, should not be a determining factor. Again, the CAT is definitely a lot cheaper. It is 2400 for many students and 1200 for those who are belonging to the protected categories. Accessibility is basically, you can take the GRE and GMAT online also from your own home. There are certain restrictions. You have to show the desk, you have to show the area where you're taking. It should be noise free, there should be nobody else in the room. But other than that, you can actually take both the GMAT and the GRE at home and online, and you can also take it at the test center. We would recommend you to take it at the test center if possible, unless there are some restrictions where you can't go to the test center. You should ideally go to the test center because it is free from any distractions, it is free from any noise, it is done in a much more professional manner, which also puts you into the exam mode as such. The CAT, you have no choice, you have to go to the exam center only, it is only at the test center. Now, how many attempts are allowed? So there is no lifetime limit for GRE. There are 5 attempts that you can take per year in a rolling 12-month period. For GMAT also, it is 5 attempts in a 12-month period. But there are overall 8 lifetime attempts. Given the cost of the exam, I do not imagine anybody would actually do more than 8 attempts, but still there is a max lifetime attempts for GMAT. There is, CAT is conducted once a year. There is no lifetime limit for how many times you can take CAT. The question review and edit. So this is something that is new to GMAT as such, which is that they have allowed you to start editing questions. In the original GMAT, once the answer is submitted, you could not touch it. But now they allow you to actually go to the end of the section. So after you have completed the entire section, then you can actually go to certain questions and edit. So how do you actually do it? So basically, the 21 questions are there. For example, consider the quantitative reasoning section. There are 21 questions. Suppose you do not know an answer to a particular question. You still have to answer it. You still have to mark an answer, because without marking an answer, you cannot go ahead. So you still have to mark an answer for it. But you can bookmark the question saying that I'm not entirely sure about this answer. I want to revisit this particular question. So then what you should do is you bookmark the question. You still have to mark an answer. Then you go to the remaining questions. At the end of all 21 questions, depending on how much time you have left in your section, you will get the option of editing the answers. So then you will get the review, review and edit answers window, where all 21 questions will be displayed. The options for editing all of them will be displayed. You can edit up to 3 questions as such. So 3 answers you can change. You can see which ones that you had bookmarked, and you say that, okay, on resolving, I think this is the actual answer. Then you can select that I want to edit the answer, and then you can change the answer for that particular question. In CAT, you can change, you can go to any, within a section, you can go back to any question and you can change it. since this is linear tested, you need not even give an answer for a particular question. You can go to the next question without applying. So because of a linear testing, there is no such thing as can I change the answer? Do I have to answer? All of that is not there. In GRE also, you are able to skip questions and edit the answer in the section. So it is not unskippable. It is not, you can edit the question. So in that terms, both GRE and CAT are the similar, but GMAT has recently started allowing editing questions, but they are still unskippable. Okay. Now let's consider the question attempts. In terms of GRE, you are only considered, your marks are only determined by the number of questions that you answer correctly. There is no negative marking for those that you have answered incorrectly or not answered at all. In GMAT, if you do not answer questions, you do get penalized. If you do not answer questions at all, you get penalized. If you do not complete the section on time, you get penalized. If you answer questions incorrectly, you do not get negative marks. But what happens is that your overall quality of questions that you are actually given comes down, and if those questions also you are not solving, the overall composite score or the percentile in your section will get impacted. Incorrectly attempted questions and skipped questions both impact your score. In CAT, only the negative marking is there for incorrectly attempted questions, so you get +3 marks for positively correct questions, minus 1 mark for every incorrect question as such. You do not get penalized for skipped questions, but in GMAT you do get penalized for skipped questions. Now this question structure, so you have both MCQ as well as theta type of questions, where you have in GRE you have single option questions, multiple option questions, and theta, that is type in the answer type questions, and in CAT you have only single option MCQs or theta, that is type in the answer type questions. In GMAT there is only MCQs, and in data insights you have drop downs. In data insights you have different type of inputs as such, where you have to essentially select 2 options. In like say 2-part analysis, you have to select the right combination of options as such. But essentially if you consider all of this, you can essentially convert it into a theta questions. You can consider that okay, option 1 in this column and option 4 in this column, it is similar to having a theta input of 1, 4. So in some ways, the question structure is similar across level. It will not play any kind of a decisive role in which exam you should actually choose, or whether it is to your advantage or disadvantage. The breaks, if you are somebody who gets exhausted very easily, I would say that GMAT is very good for you, because they give a 10-minute break. They give you one break of 10 minutes in a 2-hour 15-minute exam, which is almost unheard of, because you are in most of your cases, you have whenever you have given exams of 2 hours or so, you are expected to not take a break in that exam. But in the GMAT exam, they are actually very humane. They give you a 10-minute break. You can go outside, you can go to the restroom, you can take, you can drink water, you can calm down between sections as such. And if you are somebody who struggles with keeping their focus for extended periods of time, this might be just the right thing that you need to actually stay focused for the extended duration of the exam. Again, you have to select the exam that works for you, that works for your strengths or benefits. So this just might be the exam that actually is to your strengths. Okay. Now again, in the calculator, you get a calculator for the QR section in GRE. In GMAT, you do not get the calculator for the QR section, and trust me, you do not need it also. They are not calculation intensive questions. You do get a calculator in the data insights questions, but I would suggest that it's not really needed there also. I would argue that in many cases, in most cases, you can solve the data insights questions without a calculator. The calculator I felt was superfluous in that particular section. In CAT, you get a calculator for both the quant questions as well as the DI questions, DILR questions, and it is definitely needed because some of the quant questions are very calculation intensive. That is really not true for the other two, I feel. GRE as well as GMAT, I do not feel are that calculation intensive. So basically, there is a then section order also. For some students, this can impact, the section order can impact their overall attempt, because at times you feel that you want to start with your strongest section. If that is done properly, then you get the confidence to do the remaining sections properly. So in that case, GMAT is actually good for you because you can attempt the questions in any order. I started with the quant section because I knew that if I get the quant section right, I will do better in the other sections. In CAT, you do not have much of a choice. And then in GRE, you have basically kind of a choice between QR and VR, but AWA has to be taken first as such. So let us, so this is the difference. Again, basically, to summarize which exam is right for you. If you are in India, I would say take the CAT irrespective of what the outcome is. You should take the CAT because it might not be the right exam for you. It might not test you towards your strengths, but it is something that I feel that all students should go through this particular exam as a test of their abilities, as a test of just going through the fire, because you will essentially become hardened by it. You will become stronger as a result of preparing for the CAT exam. If you actually prepare like full throttle for the CAT exam, even if you are not able to clear it, you will find both the GRE and GMAT far more doable than if you are not prepared for CAT at all. So I would definitely say that prepare for CAT. Now, if you have taken CAT once and you realize that this is not really my cup of tea, which exam should you take? Should you take the GRE exam? Should you take the GMAT exam? In almost 99 out of 100 cases, I would say that take the GMAT Focus Edition exam. The 1 out of 100 persons is the person who is able to write very well. If you're a very good writer, if you're somebody who is extremely good at vocabulary, if you're the Shashi Tharoor of your class, then maybe GRE is a better exam for you. But in almost all other cases, GMAT Focus Edition is a better fit for you, for your strengths, for your particular testing strengths or weaknesses as such. So that with that in mind, I would say that definitely go for the GMAT Focus Edition. So with this, I have tried to explain all three exams, their comparison, who should go for what, with respect to the exam structure, what is there in the exam as such, how it tests you as such. In the next sections, I will take a deeper dive into the verbal reasoning part across the three exams, as well as the quantitative and data insights part across the three exams, and then tell you which one, what is tested where, and if depending on your strengths, which exam you should go for. So with this, we will conclude the which exam should you go for based on the overview of the exam. In this particular video, we will be continuing on our comparison of GMAT Focus Edition with GRE and CAT. If you have not seen the first part, please do see it. In that, we have given you an overview of all three exams and compared what are the strengths and weaknesses of each exam, who is, as compared to structure, who would be the right student for each type of exam. Over here, I'll be discussing the fit of the exam with the student from the perspective of verbal and the AWA section. So in this particular video, we'll only take a look at the verbal and AWA section of these three exams. There is verbal section in all three exams, there's AWA section only in GRE. The other two do not have any writing assessment section as such. So essentially looking at these two as a skill set where verbal and writing skill set is being tested, we'll be just comparing how these three exams actually test you. Where does one have an advantage? Where does one have a disadvantage? So let's get started. So let's consider the test content and the ability that is actually being tested. So ability being tested meaning what exactly do you have to do in that exam to answer the questions? What ability do you need to develop? What ability do you need to have? And that would also help us answer the question who would actually be good at it. Let's take a look at the ability being tested in GRE. So analyze and evaluate written material and synthesize information obtained from it basically is answer questions given a passage. So that is reading comprehension. The reading comprehension is not very difficult. You need to be able to answer objective questions as such, not very inferential questions, not very deep diving into material, reading between the lines. All that is not that required. It is fairly straightforward reading comprehension as such. The other skills that are being tested is basically relationship between components of the sentences. So basically fill in the blanks. To fill in the blanks, you should be able to connect different parts of the sentence. Okay, the rest of the sentence says this, so only this particular word will fit in this particular blank. And then there is sentence equivalence, which is also like fill in the blanks, but essentially you have to figure out two words which would impart the same meaning when put in that particular blank. So essentially I'll give you the example questions also. So these two are essentially fill in the blanks only. So I'll just put the color as such. So if you take a look at these two are essentially fill in the blanks and versions of fill in the blanks as such, variations of fill in the blanks, but the basic skill being tested is your vocabulary skill. You need to have good vocabulary skill. And secondly, your ability to identify links between the sentences, the meaning of the sentence, what would fit where as such. So this is essentially a variation of fill in the blanks. This is easy reading comprehension. Now consider GMAT Focus Edition. So in GMAT Focus Edition, what exactly is needed? You need two skills. One is reading comprehension, that is understanding and answering questions based on a passage, and mostly the questions are inferential questions. You will be asked about the role of a sentence in the paragraph. what would the author agree with, what would the author disagree with, which of the following is supported by the information in the passage. So all questions would be inferential questions. So this is generally reading comprehension with inferential questions. This is reading comprehension with objective questions as such. So objective questions are easier to answer. You just have to figure out, is this information there? The information is there, I can answer the question. Is this information not there? I can't answer the question. When you have inferential questions, it's not just about knowing whether the information is there or not. It is about reading between the lines, which is difficult to do. Over here, the second part is critical reasoning. Basically, you have to evaluate arguments, understand whether the argument is logically valid, what would strengthen the argument, what would weaken the argument, what are the assumptions made in the argument, what other inferences follow. All of those things are important. Plan of action is also something that will be asked. Okay, based on this information, which of the following is a solid plan of action? All of this is basically reasoning, verbal reasoning based as such. So I would say reading comprehension and CR are extremely inferential in nature, require a lot of subjective thinking and require a lot of knowledge of how to think. So basically there are guidelines that are set up in critical reasoning. You need to know exactly how to think in a guided manner. So again, this is not difficult. It is not very subjective also. It is not like, okay, I will have a different interpretation. It's not like reading a poem. It is more objective than reading a poem or reacting to a book as such. It's not that, okay, I will have one take on a book review, somebody will have a different take on a book review. It's not that subjective, but it involves reading between the lines, which means that there will be a element of subjectivity that is introduced in such kind of questions. So now in CAT, you have the similar syllabus as such. You have reading comprehension. The reading comprehension is you have a longer passage around 500 words and you are asked inferential questions, difficult questions based on it. And not only are the questions inferential, which is like we start with objective questions in GRE, we go to inferential questions in GMAT. Now we come to CAT, which is inferential questions and options which are very close to each other. So again, the difficulty is essentially increasing with each of these exams. The other part of it is basically in CAT, the VARC part, the verbal ability part. It has basically, it tests the ability to actually create linkages between sentences. So you should be able to identify that this sentence is linked to this. This is how I can unscramble the paragraph. This is the thought that is being made, or this is the thought that is being continued through the paragraph. So making logical linkages between sentences is required. So this is basically verbal reasoning in a way. So if you have that ability, you can solve questions based on odd one out, you can solve questions based on parajumbles, you can solve questions even based on sentence insertion, where you can figure out, okay, this sentence has to precede this sentence has to succeed this sentence. So using all of that, you can actually solve the VA part. The other is para summary as such, which is essentially similar to reading comprehension. You have to understand the main point of the paragraph. So in many ways, this is RC, this is RC plus CR, this is RC plus I would say verbal reasoning in a way. Okay, this is RC plus F, fill in the blanks. So if you can see RC plus fill in the blanks in general are easier, but they test your vocabulary skills. So if you are not somebody who has very strong vocabulary skills, you would not have competitive advantage over here. See, whether it is easier or simpler or harder, ultimately you have to basically see that competitively, are you better at vocabulary, are you better at answering questions based on reasoning. So if you are a more quantitative person, you would actually be better at reasoning than vocabulary. If you have a very good command on vocabulary, you would be better in the GRE FIB than in the verbal reasoning part. So basically you have to figure out what is my competitive advantage as compared to the peer test takers as such. RC is same throughout, but the degree of RC is different. Here it is more objective. GMAT is subjective, inferential, but the options are easier. CAT is subjective and the options are also harder. I'll show you the questions of each type, but let me give you a comparison of each of one of them so that you can figure out which one you should be looking at, which one is the right fit for you. So consider GRE, RC, GMAT, FERCs. And you have your CAT RCs. Okay. So over here the RCs are very short, around 200 or 250 words as such. So short RCs. This is around 400 words, so medium size RCs. These are around 500 words, not long but still longish RCs. Now, this is short objective, easy objective questions. You just have to read, know the facts and answer based on the facts given. There isn't a lot of inferential thinking. There is not a lot of reading between the lines. So, objective questions, these make your life easier. Here, the questions are subjective. There is inferential thinking, but the options are not that difficult. So, options are not close as such. Then you have the RCs from CAT. These are subjective, these require inferential thinking. Some once in a while you will get an objective question also, that okay, which of the following is given as one of the reasons, which of the following is not given as one of the reasons. So sometimes it can be easy, but generally what they do is that even when the question is easy, the options are super difficult. Options are always close to each other. So when the options are so close to each other, you have to be very careful. Even when you know the answer, in picking the right option, you have to be very careful, because they'll try to trick you and trap you by making it sound plausible, but there is some small thing wrong in the option as such. So this basically means that I particularly feel that RCs, this is the order of difficulty. CAT is the most difficult RC, GMAT FE is the second difficult RC, and GRE RCs are the easiest. Now there is a slight this as compared to some people find that this is not the case, where I particularly feel this is the order of difficulty, but some people find GMAT RC slightly more difficult than CAT, or sometimes some people might struggle with GRE RCs also. I'll tell you what happens. See, the difference is in GRE RCs you are asked different format of questions. You are not asked like an MCQ question where you have to pick one choice. In CAT you are asked an MCQ question and you have to pick one choice only among those 4 options as such. In GRE you might have to pick 2 choices, or you might have to select a sentence which plays a particular role in the paragraph. So here the format is not as easy, because you have to get both options right for you to get the marks. So basically, because of the question variability, some students might actually struggle with that, because the questions are slightly difficult, because these are unexpected questions. You do not have a lot of practice of these type of questions. Though the question itself is easy, the format might be challenging. In GMAT FE, the challenge comes from the part of the GMAT RC where you are asked for the role of a particular sentence, or you are asked for the role that a certain sentence performs, or what is the stated idea. Here basically it is not inferential thinking. Here you need to know exactly what the question type requires or demands you to do. So in particular cases, when they ask you what is the stated idea, you have to give the direct expression that is given in the passage. So you do not need to find the implied meaning, but the direct stated meaning. So in such cases, what happens is that a lot of students are not able to adapt to the format of the question, and because they are not adapting to the format of the question, then they will make a mistake. I actually made 2 mistakes in GMAT FE, and both were about identifying the stated idea of the passage. Because when you tell me identify the stated idea of the passage, I think main idea of the passage. So what is something that you can infer from the passage, or what is basically what is being conveyed through the passage. But what is conveyed through the passage is different from the stated idea. When they say stated idea, they mean one concrete thing, a concrete thing that has been explicitly given in the passage. So you have to be very careful with the question types, both in GMAT FE and GRE as such, because these are different type of exams. Their questions are much more concrete in what they are asking, and there basically a lot of students can struggle as such. That stated idea, there is a it is not the inferable idea, it is not the main idea, it is the idea expressed in the passage as such. So all these small errors can basically make you make mistakes in the GMAT FE. Another thing that you have to note is that while this is more difficult, you are allowed to make errors, because nobody is going to get 100% of the questions right in CAT. In RCs also, there are 16 questions in RCs. People will generally, even the good students will get only 12 to 13 of these 16 questions right. They'll get at least 3 questions wrong, which means that you are allowed a margin of error in CAT. The same margin of error is not there in GMAT. If you get 2 questions wrong, you are at 99 percentile. If you get 4 questions wrong, you fall even further. So basically, there is less scope for making an error in GMAT FE as such. In GRE, the scope for error is even lesser, because what happens as the difficulty, this is like, if you consider the difficulty, this is at the easier end of the spectrum, this is harder end of the spectrum. As the difficulty decreases, the scope for error also decreases. So there is low scope for error, there is high scope for error. You can get 12 out of 16 questions right and be at the top. Here you get 4 questions wrong, you are at the at 80 percentile or 70 percentile as such, which means that there is, because the questions are easier, there is low scope for error. So if you are somebody who generally makes silly mistakes or makes mistakes where your accuracy is fairly poor, you attempt quickly but your accuracy is low, GRE and GMAT will actually be punishing you for that. They require and demand accuracy, they demand exactness, they do not want a high error rate as such. So in that case, CAT would be a better exam for you. GMAT FE is somewhere striking the balance between the two, where it is slightly harder, so exactness and full accuracy is not required, but again it will punish you for being inaccurate as such. So it is somewhere in the middle. If you are somebody who is prone to making errors or who has weaker vocabulary, I would say that go for GMAT FE as compared to GRE, because the scope for error in GRE is very low. Now come to the second part. So this is the RC part, which is common to all of them. For GRE, the second part is essentially fill in the blank space. Either find out which words fit in a particular context or figure out which 2 words fit and give the same meaning. So essentially it is fill in the blank base, which is mostly, or it is like what you call in banking exams closed test, where a paragraph is given and you have missing words, so or missing phrases as such. So all of this requires you to fill in the blanks with the appropriate option as such. It requires you to identify linkages between sentences, identify that okay, this sentence has to imply this, which means that only this particular word or set of words can fit in the given blanks. Again, this is easy thing to do, but again low margin for error. GMAT FE, there is critical reasoning, and I feel critical reasoning is something that requires a lot of practice. This is not something that you can, sometimes people feel that okay, I do 2-3 RCs, I can wing it there. In the actual exam, I'll take a look at the passage and I'll try to answer the questions. It can work with RC, because if you're very good at comprehension skills, if you're somebody who has read a lot of books, who is very good at comprehension in general, you might not need a whole lot of practice, but that is not true for CR. If you go without practice for CR, you are going to suffer because of it, because CR requires a lot of practice. It requires you to be very exact. Each of the type of questions has an exact meaning, exact way of solving, and you have to be very precise in solving, because again, the scope for error is low. So in CR, basically it is practice based. You can think of it almost like quant. There will be a formulaic way of solving the CR question, and you have to follow the formula. You should not deviate from the formula. You should not say, you know what, I think this is the answer because I feel like this is the answer. No, there will be an exact answer, an answer which is defensible, and others are clearly wrong. So in CR, you should do a lot of practice because it is almost formulaic. In CAT, you have the verbal ability, which is essentially para summary, which is similar to RC. Then you have para jumbles, which is unscrambling a paragraph, putting the lines in correct order. The ORC para jumbles, basically you have 5 lines, 4 form a paragraph, 1 is the odd one out, you have to figure the odd one out. And you have para insertion or sentence insertion. Sentence insertion is similar to para jumble. You have a paragraph, you have to find out which the sentence fits in which blank, which is essentially you have a static set of sentences and one sentence which is a floater, and you have to put it in the right place. So again, all of these essentially are understanding linkages between sentences. Now the thing is that these are actually harder. CR, I feel, is not as hard, but a lot of people find CR difficult. They have experience of doing this, but I feel the core difference is that in para summary, para jumbles, OOC and sentence insertion, if you get even half of the questions right, it is a very good score. Here, if you get half of the questions right in CR, it is a disaster attempt. So because the scope for error in CR is so low, you can't actually make a lot of errors as such. So you have to basically say that, okay, it's RC and CR only, but I need a ton of practice for each one of them because I need a very high accuracy rate for getting a good score in GMAT. Over here, a lower accuracy would be tolerated and even can get you at the top percentile, but not so in GMAT FE. So in general, what would I say? Easier to harder. GRE is easier, GMAT is slightly in the middle, and CAT is harder. But the scope for error here is very low. If you want to get in mid 160s to high 170s, very low scope for error. Here there is a moderate scope for error. Here there is a high scope for error because the questions are harder. Now let us take a look at a few sample questions from each one of them. So consider these GRE questions. So this is a GRE reading comprehension. As you can see, a very short kind of a set as such. It would take you less than a minute to read this, minute and a half. And again over here, the questions are fairly straightforward. Which of the following issues are related to this? So you can directly read this and answer the questions that are related to that. So it is not difficult to answer the question because it is a direct question based on the paragraph given. Over here this is where it becomes tricky because it is not MCQ where you have to select one option, but you have to select all options. So you have to select multiple options and you do not even know how many of them are right. So one of these three might be right, two of these three might be right, three of these three might be right. So because of that, there is a slight confusion of whether or not how to answer this question. When you have to select one of four options, you can use option elimination, but here you can't use option elimination because you have to know whether or not something is true or not. Now last part is the hardest, where you have to select a sentence that distinguishes the two ways of integrating. So you have to select the correct sentence from the paragraph given. So over here basically the paragraph is easy, the questions are direct, but the question formats can be tricky for the first time GRE test taker. If you take a look at the GMAT FE RCs, you will see this is a slightly longer reading comprehension passage. It is slightly more involved, it requires thinking. The questions are not easy, they require you to think about the information given. Which of these would logically follow? So you have to think that, okay, this information is given, what next in this? So this is inference, this is not direct statement, this is not something that is directly given in the passage. This is, you have to think what should come next in this logical line of thought. So again, this is an inferential question. If you see, all questions are inferential. The only thing that you will get, or the only leeway that you will get, is that the options will not be very close to each other. If the options are not close to each other, you can use option elimination to figure out the right answer. Consider the reading comprehension passage for CAT. I have not put the whole thing because it is 500 plus words, but it is a longer RC. The questions are difficult, they are subjective, they are inferential, and the options are very close to each other. It is very difficult to say which of these options is right. You will generally be able to eliminate two of the four, but you will still be stuck between two options as such. Each of the options is plausible. There is no directly obviously wrong option also. So because of that, this actually is the hardest RCs to solve. Longer, more involved thinking, and more close options where you are confused between the options. So with that, I would say that this is hardest, but you can make one or two mistakes without being too severely penalized for that. Now let us consider the other parts of GRE, which is the text completion and sentence equivalence. So text completion, as you can see, you can either get one particular missing fill in the blanks with one blank, or you can get fill in the blanks where you have to fill all blanks from the options given. So it's a paragraph and you have to fill the correct option as such. The sentence equivalence is also like fill in the blanks, but instead of having one option, instead of selecting one option, you have to select two options. So here the sentences, though it does contain some pioneering ideas, one would hardly characterize the work as dash. So when you say that it has some new ideas, but it is not that new. So in the given blank, you have to put something which is novel, the idea is novel or new, or in some way a pioneering work as such. So it should be basically synonymous with pioneering. So which one of these is synonymous with pioneering? Original and innovative are. So basically you have to select two words, two options which give the same meaning to the sentence. So in this case, C and F will give you the same meaning. So over here you have to select two answers, which is not as simple as selecting one answer. There is higher scope for error. So this is basically what is required. All of it is fill in the blanks, but fill in the blanks with a twist at times. Now consider the critical reasoning that is there in GMAT FE. So this is an example of critical reasoning. So you will be given a paragraph which is the premise of critical reasoning, and you will be asked that which of the following is a flaw in the argument, which of these would weaken the argument, which of these would strengthen the argument, what is parallel reasoning, or what reasoning is similar to this reasoning as shown, which would actually bolster the argument. So all of this is basically argument evaluation. You have to look at the premise, split it up into parts. This is the facts, these are the assumptions being made, this is the conclusion being reached, this is the kind of reasoning that is being taking place, this is the flaw in reasoning. First you have to analyze the argument itself. Once you have analyzed the argument, you have to basically then say that, okay, if these are the assumptions being made, if I bolster the assumptions, I strengthen the conclusion. If I attack the assumptions, I weaken the conclusion. So all of this requires an almost clinical view of the argument and a lot of practice to actually dissect arguments in this way. So again, over here, I would say that this is difficult to do, but with a lot of practice, you can become very exact in critical reasoning. But take a look at the other one, which is para summary. You have a paragraph given and 4 possible summaries for that. Over here, it is easier to actually make a mistake, partly because the summaries can be close to each other. There is no perfect summary as such, and because there is no perfect summary, it is easy to get confused between summaries. Moreover, what happens in CAT verbal ability section also is that by the time you come to verbal ability, you generally have very little time on your hands, which would make it difficult for you to correctly answer many of the questions that are given. Now consider the remaining parts of CAT where you have, say, parajumbles. Your 4 sentences are given. You have to unscramble the paragraph and say that, okay, the order of the sentences should be, I'm not actually solving it, but say you have to say that the order of the sentences is 2, 3, 5, 4, 1. So because you're unscrambling the paragraph, there are multiple possibilities as such. This is one of the possibilities. There is a high scope for error, because even if the answer is 2, 3, 1, 4, you get the whole question wrong. You do not get any marks for getting the first 2 sentences in correct order. So with that particular limitation, what basically happens is that the questions are harder, but because of that, a lot of students actually struggle to get good marks, and the percentile scores required to hit 99 percentile, 100 percentile. Here you can actually afford to make a few mistakes and you will not be severely punished for every mistake. Here you are given in the second part, you are given a sentence insertion question. So the sentence is given and you have to identify in which of these particular blanks it can fit as such. So it is like fill in the blank, but instead of putting a word, you have to fill in an entire sentence. So here you have to find out what are the linkages between the sentences, and once you identify the linkages between the sentences, you can then say that, okay, this sentence should be over here. So this is the basic idea of what is there in CAT versus GRE versus GMAT. The basic thing that you have to remember is that GMAT is not super easy. It requires some amount of effort and consistent practice as such. RC as well as CR requires a lot of practice, but it is much easier than CAT. You can basically the amount of effort required to get very good at CAT is much higher because the questions are objectively harder. Here with much lesser or much more controlled effort, you can get very good at GMAT, RC and CR as such. But it requires a lot of practice, A, and secondly, it requires like consistent effort because it's a very well-defined syllabus, and if you master the syllabus, you can get all of the questions right. So that is what I want you to know, that GMAT FE, when it comes to VA as such, is striking the balance between difficulty and scope for error. And because the task is very clearly defined, it is very easy to actually get very good at it with practice as such. It is not vaguely defined. They won't suddenly ask very difficult passages. They won't suddenly ask a different type of question entirely. So because of that, your job of preparing for it is actually much easier. So with that, I would suggest that if you are somebody who is exceptionally good at vocabulary, you would have a strength in GRE. But if you are somebody who is very good at reasoning, verbal reasoning particularly, who has good comprehension skills, you would do very well in GMAT FE. In CAT, if you have very good comprehension skills, you would also do well in CAT. But in CAT, the issue is that the questions or the level of comprehension skills that are required are much higher level. These are harder questions. If you are somebody who struggles to get 80 percentile or above 80 percentile in CAT reading comprehension, what I would suggest is that GMAT FE reading comprehension might be more suited to your style. If you are less of a person who can read from different topics, and if you have limited inferential abilities, this GMAT FE might be the right fit for you. Now, there is no AWA for either GMAT FE or for CAT, but it is there in GRE. So these are a sample of the type of AWA assignments that come. You have to essentially analyze an issue and make arguments. They require you to basically, they score you on the clarity of your arguments, the clarity of your thoughts, your ability to articulate your arguments effectively, your grammar, writing skills as such. So if you are somebody who has very good grammar and writing skills, if you are somebody who is able to write effectively, communicate in a written communication is excellent, then this might be a good fit for you. If you are somebody who has not written anything for an extended period of time, this would actually be a disadvantage to you. While this is not directly considered in your overall score as such, this again would affect your admission as such. It would affect your preparation because having a poor AWA will actually impact your remaining sections as such. So again, this is something that you have to consider. If you have to do well in AWA, These are the skills that you are required. You have to be excellent in written communication, in argumentation. If you are somebody who is excellent in written communication and argumentation, then GRE might be a better fit for you. If you are somebody who is more verbal reasoning oriented, who is more oriented towards comprehension, then GMAT FE and CAT might be a better fit for you. So with this, I'll be ending the overview of the 3 exams, verbal and AWS section. In this particular video, I'll be taking a look at the quant and DI section, comparing them and trying to figure out which exam is more suited to which kind of applicant. So let us first take a look at the quant and data literacy or data insights or data interpretation, whatever you wish to call it. Let us take a look at these sections for each one of them. So for GRE, there is no separate section. There are data interpretation questions that are there as part of the quant section as such. In the quant section, you have questions which are based on arithmetic, algebra, geometry, combinatorics, statistics, which is the basic, I would say basic 10 standard or 10 standard syllabus throughout the world as such. These are the type of questions that come, and there are 3 types of inputs that you can have to choose. You can have to choose a single option MCQ, multiple choice MCQ, or a type in the answer type questions as such. The questions are not difficult, they are actually very solvable. The questions are not very time intensive also. You can solve them fairly quickly. So on the whole, I would say that this section is fairly easy to solve. Having said that, if you're taking the exam from India, the general cutoffs for Indian students are very high, because generally Indian students tend to do very well in the quant section of GRE. So over here, there is very low scope for error, low margin for error. So while the questions are easy, the scope for error is much lesser. Let's take a look at the GMAT section. In the GMAT section, you have only arithmetic, algebra, some amount of statistics, and combinatorics as such. There is no geometry, so a big chunk of formulas that you have to remember, all the syllabus is removed from the particular syllabus, because you do not have to remember a lot of formulae, etc., because geometry is gone. Also, the question type is fairly fixed. It's always single option MCQ as such. Having said that, the questions are slightly more difficult than GRE, but not much more difficult as such, just slightly a degree harder than GRE as such. So as the level of difficulty increases, the scope for error increases. So you can get up to 2 questions or 3 questions wrong in quant without being penalized too much as such. You have a separate section for data insights. These questions actually tend to be much harder. These are difficult questions, much harder than the quant reasoning section. The quant reasoning section, I would say, is very doable. In the data insights questions, I feel are difficult to solve because they require a lot of thinking. Each question requires a lot of thinking. Each question requires a lot of reasoning as such. And though there are like, it's a separate section, you have enough time to do each question as such. Each question, I feel, sometimes requires, some questions require 3 minutes of thinking or 4 minutes of thinking. So this is a bit of an intensive form of GMAT as such. I would say of the 3 sections, data insights is by far the most hardest form of hardest part of GMAT focus edition as such. Now with that, when the difficulty increases, the scope for or the margin for error increases, which means that even if you get a few questions wrong on this one, it is not going to penalize you that much. Okay, so this is about the quant reasoning and data literacy for GMAT. Now you come to CAT, which is much more harder than both of them. CAT quant tends to be much harder. Each question will require you a lot of thinking, lot of solving. Each question will take a minimum of 2 minutes to solve, but ideally would end up taking you 3 minutes to solve as such. And you have very little time per question. So again, it's a fight against the clock also. It has arithmetic, algebra, geometry, number systems, combinatorics, some bit of statistics. It has a wide portion, and in that wide portion also a vast variety of formulas, question types, etc. are asked. So this has a vast syllabus, as well as the difficulty of the questions is fairly high. So if you are actually preparing for this, it will take you a lot of time to actually master CAT quant. It will take you, say, maybe 1/3 the time to master GMAT quant, and it would take you about 1/4 the time to master GRE quant, for example. CAT quant is the hardest, most widest syllabus and very difficult questions. GMAT FE, I would say, is much easier as compared to CAT in terms of difficulty of quant, and GRE is far more easier even than the GMAT. Now in the CAT you have a separate section which is called a data interpretation and logical reasoning, but it is very different from data interpretation as you see in GRE or even data insights as you see as part of GMAT focus edition. See, GMAT focus edition, the data insights are testing your ability to read charts or understand multiple sources of inputs, etc. It requires some amount of number crunching, some amount of reasoning, but CAT logical reasoning and data interpretation is on a different level entirely because it requires a lot of reasoning. It is essentially a puzzle. Most of the options there are actually proper puzzles with a little bit of data interpretation added to it. It's almost as if like it will be one element of a large puzzle that you have to solve. Each of those puzzles can take up to 20 minutes to solve, and if you are not able to solve within 20 minutes, there is a good chance that you might end up getting stuck and not finding the answer, which means that your 20 minutes are over without you marking a single answer. So it is a high stakes, high stress situation in CAT. It is much easier in GMAT, but in no way trivial. I would say of the three sections, data insights is the trickiest and also provides you the most source for actually outperforming your peers. Data interpretation in GRE is part of GRE Quant, so it's not really that difficult. Now let's take a look at, I'll just summarize all the things that I have mentioned till now. So if I take a look at quant of GRE versus GMAT, focus edition versus CAT, in terms of difficulty, this is the least difficult, this is moderate difficulty, and this is actually fairly hard in difficulty as such. Then you consider the scope for errors as such. Here, if you get even 8 to 10 questions right out of 22, even that is good enough to get a 99 percentile. On the other hand, in GMAT FE, if you get more than 4 questions wrong, it's likely that you will actually not get 99 percentile. So, you can get up to 2 to 3 questions wrong at max to beyond that you will go below the 99 percentile level. GRE, again, it is very close. You cannot get a lot of questions wrong. Otherwise, you will go below the 170 score. And again, you need the 170 score and the mid 160 score in GRE to get a good score. So again, the scope for error becomes much lesser. This will be like literally 1 to 2, 2 to 3 questions wrong. Here, you can solve only 8 to 10 questions out of 22 and still get a decent score. Again, over here, you have no ability to skip the questions. You have to answer all the questions, and at the end of the session in GMAT FE, you can look at the bookmark questions and maybe change your answer up to 3 answers. Over here in GRE also, you can change the answers later on, but again, the level of flexibility of choosing questions is not there as it is in CAT. You can choose which questions you want to attempt. You can realize that, okay, I'm actually very good at algebra, I'm not very good at geometry, and you can then decide basically what your strategy will be. You do not have that kind of optionality in GRE or GMAT. Now let us take a look at the data interpretation section. Data interpretation in this is part of the quant section. It's not a separate section as such, and it is in general fairly easy. With GMAT, it is a data insights section as such. I would say this is difficult. It requires a lot of practice because the question types are different. They are very different from what you would have generally solved. When you see a CAT question, you would have solved something similar in your early years at some point of time. When you see GRE questions, quant questions, you would have solved those kind of questions. I have never solved anything like data insights questions in my life because they were very different from what I had solved till then. So this is going to take you a lot of practice to get used to those kind of questions, and they are difficult. They are not trivial. They require a lot of thinking. Then you have the DILR section, which I personally, even after taking CAT for so many years, I do not feel confident about this section at all. It is one of those sections which gives nightmares, not just to first time test takers, but even experienced test takers, because it is just one of those high risk kind of moves. You choose the wrong set, you are out of 20 minutes, you have a disaster attempt. It's just a very high stakes, high stress scenario where you have to solve 2 out of 4 sets, and each of those sets is going to take you up to 15 to 20 minutes. And if you don't get the set right, all of your 20 minutes or half of the section's time is going to go waste. So again, DILR, I would say, is definitely the hardest. But there is a lot of things that basically you can essentially solve one set and hope to clear the cutoff. And if you solve 2 sets out of 4, you'll definitely clear the cutoff. So basically, again, there is room to choose, room to select, and basically even let go of certain things which you are actually weaker at. Now consider the type of questions that come in GRE. As I mentioned, there are the type of entries, or like the selection type is basically single answer choice MCQ. Multiple answer choice MCQ, basically you have to say select 2-3 options as such. Here you have to select say one option. I have not solved, but basically here you have to select one option. Here you might have to select 2-3 options, or it can be the type in the answer type where you have to type in the answer. So these are the type of answers that are expected in GRE. Their questions can be simple word problems that are as given over here, or they can be quantitative comparison. So you have to say which one of these two quantities is larger, which is smaller, or it can be a part of data interpretation where a chart or a table is given and you have to answer questions based on that chart. So again, there are 3 types of questions and 3 ways of answering them. So there is a bit of a diversity in the kind of questions that are asked in the quant section. Now consider the same thing for GMAT and CAT. So in GMAT, you can see there is always only single option MCQ. Only one option of these 5 will be correct. The questions are fairly straightforward in terms of their wording and how to solve them. There is no diversity either in the question type, and even the syllabus is limited. So when the syllabus is limited, there's not much diversity in the question type. There is a certain level of comfort that you can get through practice. But one more thing that will happen is basically when you have simple syllabus, what is expected is that you have to practice like crazy so that everything is perfect. You do not have a large scope for error. So when you have only arithmetic and geometry mostly that comes, and some amount of number system, some amount of statistics and combinatorics, the expectation is that you have to get every single question right, or nearly all questions right. So that is basically the point, that the syllabus is not going to take you a lot of time to cover the formulas or concepts, etc. But the expectation is that then after completing that, you practice like crazy so that you have it completely locked down as such. When you come to CAT, you can see the questions are harder. You have 2 ways of answering. There is either a single answer MCQ or type in the answer type where you have to type in the answer. The questions are difficult. They will take you like twice as long as compared to GMAT FE to answer. It requires a lot of thinking. It requires a lot of effort. Each question requires a lot of effort, and sometimes the cutoffs or the way to actually clear the cutoffs for CAT can go down to even like you solve 8 out of 22 questions, it is enough. So it's sometimes that difficult as such. Sometimes you might have the cutoffs rise up to like say 42 marks and all, but sometimes the cutoffs can be as low as 20 marks as such. So the idea being that the difficulty is fairly high. You have to respond to varying levels of difficulty, and also basically each question requires a certain amount of effort. There will be no sitters, there will be no easy questions. Each question is challenging, and as the difficulty rises, the level required of how many questions that are required to be solved correctly, that falls down. So that is there in your favor as such. Now let us take a look at the data insights part of GMAT FE. So one type of question that many of you might be familiar with are data sufficiency questions. So data sufficiency questions earlier in GMAT used to come in the quant section. They have been put in the data insight section. So these are generally the type of questions that you would be more familiar with, and they are easy to solve. Of the data insights questions, these take the least time, and basically they help you save time, so that then you can spend that time on the remaining 4 types of questions that come in GMAT FE. So one type of question that comes in two-part analysis. These are also on the whole easier side of questions. So these can be math based as well as non-math based. So math based is basically you are given a question over here and you have to select how much liters of fuel is used in 1 hour, how much liters of fuel is used for 60 kilometers. You have to make 2 choices over here. I'm not solved, but basically you have to choose 2 choices over here. And when both of them are correct, that is when you will get the full marks. Okay. So this is basically two-part analysis, which is essentially you have to make 2 selections and both selections have to be right. So again, this is math based. This can easily be non-math based, which can be based on logical reasoning, for example. So you can be given a set of conditions. So for example, say suppose there are 5 faculty members A, B, C, D, E, and A is an engineer, B is a doctor or something like that. And suppose the first condition is that you have to form a team with the engineer, a doctor and this. And the second team has to be formed with like say a physicist and a chemist. So then select which of the options could be possible answers for team 1, which of the options could be a possible answer for team 2. So this is logical reasoning based, this is not maths based, and the same format can be used for non-math based problems also. So this is the format of the question. The question underlying it can be based on time, speed, distance, it can be based on profit and loss, it can be based on multiple quantitative things as well as non-quantitative things. The other type of questions that come in data insights are graphical representation. You will be given a graph. So over here a Venn diagram is given and each dot in that Venn diagram represents a particular number of students. So each dot is 10 students. So based on that, you have to basically say that, okay, if there are a total of 300 students, each dot is 10 students, there are 30 dots. So I have to essentially use this Venn diagram and calculate how many people have taken are 30 years of age or older, how many have no school diploma, find the overlap of it, find those who lie outside these two Venn diagrams, and essentially complete this graphical representation into a proper Venn diagram. This is basically a Venn diagram based graphical representation. A graphical representation can also be on a line chart, a bar chart, a pie chart, on anything essentially. So any form of chart, table, chart can, not table as such, but any form of chart or Venn diagram can essentially come in graphical representation. The format that you have to use to answer these kind of questions is that based on the graph, there might be a graph followed by another graph, there might be two graphs or a graph followed by a table also. But based on the graph and the information that is given, you have to make two selections from two drop down boxes. So from this drop down box, you will have like 3 options or 4 options, and you have to select which of these options is valid for the given scenario. And the same way you have to select for the second sentence. So the drop down that you select essentially should make the given statement true. So if if one student is selected from the 300 surveyed, the chance of that person being 30 or a high school graduate. So of these options, you will have one which is equal to that probability. You have to choose the probability as such. So essentially, this is a probability based question which you have to answer by drawing the Venn diagram. And once you have drawn the Venn diagram, use probability phenomenon and answer what is the value of that probability. So essentially, the format is slightly difficult to understand because the whole selecting a value from the drop down such that the sentence becomes valid, etc., is something you might not have seen before. This is a combination of mathematical concepts of Venn diagram and probability. It can be a combination of mathematical concepts of, say, like graphs and pigeonhole principle, or this can be a form of combination of, say, graphs with like percentage value or percentage increase, decrease, anything as such. So it can be quantitative based. It is generally quantitative based. There might be some qualitative assessments that you can do, that okay, this has to be at least this much percent or at most this much percent. All of that could also be part of graphical representation. Then you have table based analysis, where generally a table is given. This table is generally sortable by each type or column head as such. So you can sort this table by the names of commodities, by the production in the world share, etc. So you can sort the table by each column, and once you have sorted, you can answer the statements based on the given table. So you have to essentially determine whether this statement that is given is true or not. If it is true, you have to select yes. If this statement is false, you have to select no. And this assessment you can do on the basis of the information given in the table. This is pure simple data interpretation. It is not difficult and is one of the easier questions that you can solve in data insights. The last one, which is the trickiest one of the lot when it comes to data insights, is multi-source reasoning. In multi-source reasoning, you will be given varying sources of information. Some sources of the information might be like this, where it is a text is given. In another tab, you will be given, for example, a pie chart, a table, a graph. In another tab, you might be given another graph, or you might be given a table as such. So basically, there will be 3 sources of information. One, a report by A, another a report by B, third, a news item somewhere. So using all of these disparate sources of information, you have to make inferences. Like this particular format, you have to essentially determine whether a given sentence is true or not. So if this statement is true, you have to select yes. If this statement is false, you have to select no. Similar format as the table analysis, but the effort required is not just quantitative but also qualitative, because essentially in many cases the information is hidden somewhere in a completely different part of the report as such. Sometimes it is given that at least 2/3 is the represented by X or something like that. So the key skill that is being tested over here is your ability to combine different sources of information and find the relevant information. The relevant information is not provided to you easily. You have to literally search for it, find it, combine varying sources of information to arrive at the answer. Another option that can come from this is basically when you have multi-source reasoning, 2 of the questions will be of this type where you have to select yes or no, and 1 question will be of the last type where you have to answer a direct verb problem based on the information that is given. This, I feel, is the hardest. It requires the most time because it requires a lot of searching and computation as such. So these are the difficult things that you will get in your data insight section. Now let's take a look at the LRDI sets that come in CAT. The LRDI sets that come in CAT are generally hardest. For example, this set is given to you over here. This will take you 15 to 20 minutes to solve in an actual CAT scenario. It is a difficult set to solve. It is not an easy set. It requires a lot of reasoning, a lot of thinking. It requires you to understand what is mean, median, mode, understand how to fill a table where there are empty spaces, empty blanks. So it's a difficult set. The questions answers can be type in the answer type, so even the options will not help you answer the questions. So these are difficult sets to solve, and in many cases a lot of students struggle in LRDI. If you are somebody who struggles a lot in LRDI, I would highly recommend taking the GMAT FE exam, because while data insights is not trivial, it is something that you can actually prepare well for. It is predictable. It is not going to be a nightmare. If you spend like 100 hours on data insights, this is something clearly that you can do very well in with practice. It is not difficult. It is just different. That's all that is there to it. Now, let us take a look at a final idea of how to make the decision whether you should go for GRE, GMAT FE or CAT. So basically, it has to be first decision that has to be taken is basically on the cost of the exam. As you can understand, the GMAT exam and GRE exam are expensive exams. Some of the students might not be able to pay those fees, but if you are able to pay the 28,000 fees, etc., I would highly recommend taking the GMAT exam in addition to the CAT exam also. Again, the idea of whether or not you should take the GMAT exam or the GRE exam depends on the kind of schools that you are applying to. If you have decided to do your MBA outside India, then you should definitely give the GMAT exam. Between the GRE and GMAT exam, remember that GMAT is more widely accepted. It is better fit for the Indian students. It has a better understanding of the strengths of Indian students. It is 2/3 quantitatively based, and for most students, when you consider Indian students versus the pool of worldwide students, Indian students have a much better strength in quant as compared to the verbal ability part. So you would have a significant advantage in the GMAT FE as compared to GRE. I would highly recommend that if you're confused which exam should I take, the GRE or the GMAT, you should always take the GMAT. The only exceptions to that rule are those who are fairly poor in their quantitative skills and are exceptionally gifted in the verbal skills as such. If you have done say your graduation or your undergraduation in like say literature or English honors, definitely go for the GRE. There you would be at the same level as most of the English students who have a better command on the language. So definitely that might be the right path for you. But for like most of the students who come from either a science background or an engineering background or any of the other backgrounds which are not tilted towards English, you would have a better chance with GMAT. Okay. Now, the other thing that you should essentially consider is the time and the flexibility that each exam offers. So, CAT is the time required or the time in your hand for each question is much lesser. So, for example, in CAT, you have less than a minute per question as such. In GMAT, you have roughly around 2 minutes per question. In GRE also, you have 1.6 minutes per question, but GRE is easy, so you can do it in 1 minute also. But in CAT, you have somewhere around 1 minute, under 2 minutes per question. And each question is slightly difficult, so it's not going to be done in 1 minute or even 2 minutes. Many questions require 3.5 minutes to solve. So the idea then is that while it is difficult, the choice also is there so that you can leave questions that you feel are too difficult. Again, question selection becomes very important in CAT because again, you are not expected to solve the entire paper. You're supposed to solve only the questions which actually do you the most justice, which are your strengths and which are not your weaknesses as such. In GMAT, there's no question of strengths and weaknesses. You have to solve everything. Same with GRE, you have to solve everything. So essentially, what is the difference? In GMAT and GRE, you have less flexibility to leave questions. In CAT, you have the flexibility to leave questions. In GMAT and GRE, you won't be that pressured for time. If you are somebody who crumbles under time pressure, it is better to give GMAT as compared to CAT as such. The final thing that I will say to you is that why you should give GMAT. The first thing that I will tell you is that GMAT is accepted by many Indian colleges. So even if you are looking for MBA within India, I would still say that this is a good plan B. Because if you have not given CAT yet, you are going to give CAT in November, I would still suggest that give the GMAT somewhere in October or September as such. Prepare for it. The idea behind it is that firstly, it will, if you do well in GMAT and you have a good score in hand, it will considerably reduce the pressure that you will have on you while going for CAT. And if you are actually more relaxed, you do much better in CAT than if you have a lot of pressure on you. So this will essentially reduce the pressure for CAT also. And it is I know that 28K is not nothing, but 28K is not a huge amount of money also. So if you give GMAT just to reduce pressure, just to reduce the stress on you, even then it is worth it. Again, this score is accepted by many prestigious colleges, including ISB. So if you are planning to go to ISB, this would be the score that you would need for that. Again, over here, one more thing that you would realize is that there is significant overlap in the syllabus. So if you have prepared for the GMAT exam, in a way it is going to help you in the CAT exam. Particularly, I would say that if you have prepared for GMAT critical reasoning, you will find CAT also, your reading comprehension will improve, your reasoning will improve, your ability to solve reading comprehension questions which are based on critical reasoning in CAT improve, like strengthen the argument, weaken the argument. All of that will improve if you do pure critical reasoning from GMAT. So because of all of these reasons, I always recommend that give GMAT before you give CAT. Somewhere in August or September, have that score ready, because if you have a good score on your hand, what it is going to do is it is going to make your task of cracking the CAT much easier. Having multiple options or multiple opportunities in your hands is always better than later regretting and saying that, okay, maybe I should have done this, or maybe I should have also pursued this. So I would always suggest give the GMAT before you give the CAT. It will help you prepare for CAT, and it would reduce a lot of the mental burden that is there on your head before CAT. It would make you much more relaxed for the exam. So with that, I will be signing off. And I hope this video has helped you make the right decision, and best of luck for all the exams that you'll be taking this year. Thank you.